after 30 minutes of farming, for 30 minutes of slow motion farming wheat, which I'm like, I never want to see a farming sequence ever again in film. Certainly not one by Zack Snyder. But you literally have a scene. It's just like baby shit. It's like what a middle schooler thinks how to build character depth, where you have each character sit at a table, and you have Jimon Hunsu again, and you have some talented actors in here. They're all wasted across the board. But you have Jimon Hunsu that then goes, all right, everyone, let's go around the table and talk about ourselves because I don't think we know about each other very well. And they just proceed to do that one by one by one by one. And it's the same story. It's the same story. It's like, I came from this planet. I'm fucking sad. The Empire fucked me over. The end. That's what it is. And it's like, what are you doing? All right, my friends, let's go ahead and move on to the worst movies of 2024 so far. Now, I have already done my best movies of 2024. I highly encourage you guys to check out that list, so far in 2024. I've managed to see a lot of movies. Thankfully, a lot of good ones, a lot of great ones, excellent ones, but also some mediocre ones, some bad ones. I mean, downright terrible movies. I've managed to compile a top 10 list of the worst movies of 2024, but I also have a number of honorable mentions that I wanted to bring up as well. Some of these might be a little controversial. Some of these might be on a lot of people's best of list, but when we get there, we get there. I'm sure we can have a fantastic discussion about all of these films. But just starting off with my honorable mentions, I have like 6 or 7 honorable mentions I wanted to focus on first before getting into the truly worst movies of this year so far. But I want to bring up a film that I think a lot of people forgot even came out, and that was Damsel, which is this dark fantasy film starring Millie Bobby Brown. Yeah, but she's anything but a damsel. It was basically like a critique on the fantasy damsel in distress. The princess needing to be rescued by the fire-breathing dragon. Well, she don't need no goddamn prince. She doesn't need a knight. She can do it herself, which honestly, like on paper, is a fine concept. I think that's cool. It's like, okay, well, instead of the princess, being rescued from the fire-breathing dragon or whatever, she has to rescue herself. Like, the only person that's going to be able to save her in this situation is herself. And as interesting premise, where she's basically tricked into marrying this royal family that's just trying to appease this dragon for, hundreds of years. To protect themselves, but they've had to manipulate in order to maintain their power. It's like, again, it's an interesting premise. The problem is that along with Millie Bobby Brown, the rest of the cast, like, no one's really all that interesting. The dialogue is trite. The characterization is incredibly thin for everyone. Millie Bobby Brown, I think, is a fine actress. She's, popped up in some interesting things. I like the Enola Holmes movies have been some people have liked. Obviously, people know her best for Stranger Things, which has been some of her best work, obviously. But here, she doesn't really get a lot to do, despite being the main lead. A lot of it's just hiding. A lot of it's just hiding from the dragon in this movie on various sound stages. And going from place to place, just constantly, retreating. And that's just made it a very dull watch for me. Even though I love creature features or I love bottle films where they just take place in one location, you got to do at least something a little interesting with the environment. You got to make the environment itself threatening or have a bit of a personality instead of like, well, man, this is just obviously a soundstage or a set somewhere, and she's just fighting a CGI dragon who doesn't really have much of a personality either. It's a very dull, forgettable film with characters you just don't really care about whatsoever. But moving on from Damsel, a movie that I think is probably on a lot of people's best of list, and for some other people it might be on their worst of list. But I gotta bring up, and that is Civil War by Alex Garland. Has a pretty good cast of people, from Kristen Dunst to Wagner Moura, Kaylee Spaney, who's been showing up in a lot of things, Stephen McKinley Henderson, Nick Offerman plays the president. And, this whole movie, it follows a team of photojournalists, war journalists, traveling, I believe, from New York City to Washington, D.C. to interview the president during a fictional civil war that's being fought across the United States. Now, I think there are several scenes in this movie where there's some great action. There's some really good choreography. I think Jesse Plemons, even though he only has 5 minutes of screen time, he makes great use of that of those 5 minutes and actually delivers like a really cool, tense scene involving a lot of our primary characters. But there are several issues. I have several big issues with this movie. One is just it makes no attempt to explain this conflict whatsoever. It's almost as if it's afraid to explain the conflict. It lacks any sense of environmental storytelling or world building. And it's like, okay, if you're not going to explain the conflict, at the very least, make these characters interesting. And they're just not interesting whatsoever. Matter of fact, some of them are either they range from being either dull, and they talk about nothing in between, because really it's not even a big war movie, despite it selling itself as Civil War, as this conflict that's gripped the United States. It's more of a road movie. Just these people traveling from place to place and occasionally experiencing conflict or a tense scenario, such as they did with Jesse Plemons' character. But one of the most frustrating aspects of the movie is how they create faux conflict within the characters themselves. And listen, Kaylee Spaney, I've seen her in a couple things, but this movie I don't think does her any favors. Again, I don't blame her. I think it's just the right for the character. She's just there to be the annoying, bratty, young character who just gets herself in trouble and who doesn't listen and inevitably causes more conflict down the way. And that's personally a pet peeve of mine, just the annoying kid character that causes misfortune to happen. In this movie, especially in the last third, it definitely indulges in that. And I just found that very frustrating. But at the end of the day, it's just like, at the very least, try to, I don't know, chap, but I feel like a conflict such as the Civil War is a very political conflict. It's a very political event. And so I really don't understand why why Alex Garland or any of the other collaborators that worked in the film just kind of make no attempt to really get into the minutia of this conflict. I think that could have helped it. It would have made me feel more invested in what's actually going on. But they just choose not to do that. And I guess instead it's more about it's more of a critique on how photojournalists or war journalists kind of become numb to these conflicts just to get the best shot. And I'm like, okay, I guess that's what the movie's trying to push or showcase. I don't know. I found that aspect very disappointing and the majority of the film incredibly frustrating, aside from Jesse Plemons, who has a fantastic moment in this film. And originally wasn't even supposed to be in the movie to begin with. But he did a good job. But outside of that, not a fan. Another honorable mention for worst movie of 2024, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Now, I like the original Ghostbusters film. I do. I think it's a seminal 80s movie. Great, supernatural fantasy comedy. But I'm by no means a huge Ghostbusters fan. I've liked some of the animated shows that have come out, like Real Ghostbusters and Extreme Ghostbusters. I think that's fun. But outside of that, and when it comes to the movies, I found all of them to be disappointing or just downright awful. Whether it be the sequel, Ghostbusters 2, that came out later in the 80s, Ghostbusters 2016 by Paul Feig, hated that film, and Afterlife, even though I liked the first half of that movie, as soon as you get to the back half, it just becomes all about nostalgia. And that's really what this franchise is. It's so afraid, especially when it comes to the movies. It's so afraid to move past nostalgia. It's so afraid to, expand the world. It's just constantly about let's just make all these references. Let's put in the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. Let's put in Slimer. It's like just stop. Just do new things. Within this world, expand on the lore or these characters. And, Afterlife indulges in nostalgia, and so does the new Empire, even though it at the very least it has a new villain, which, okay, I appreciate that. But why do we have to have all these scenes that are either, one, just there to deliver exposition so we can get to point A to point B and then to point C. Or it's just to recreate a sequence from an earlier Ghostbusters film. Like, why do we need to bring back Slimer? Why do we need to see the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man or Men again? Like, why we got to go to the library ghosts? It's like, just stop. And listen, I Ghostbusters fans, I think a lot of them, not all of them, but I think you have a good portion that they just want to indulge in that nostalgia, and this movie gives it to them. But for me, that just wanted to see this expand on this world, it doesn't really do that. And that's really frustrating. Like, really the only thing about, other than maybe the new villain, who's like, yeah, it's fine. It's just, visually it's interesting. But McKenna Grace, I think, is the one really good thing about these recent movies. Her character, she's the granddaughter of Egon's character. And I like her scenes of Dan Aykroyd, and them spending time with each other was great. But outside of those moments, and there's just in this movie has way too many characters as well. There's way too many characters. Like, Paul Rudd doesn't even need to be here. Finn Wolfhard feels like he's obligated to be in there, even though he really serves no purpose to the plot. It's too busy. It has too many characters, and it frequently indulges in nostalgia when it really doesn't need to anymore. And that's what's so frustrating about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire. Another movie that is a part of my honorable mentions is Kung Fu Panda 4. Now, one thing I will praise about this film is I think the animation does look spectacular. It looks great. Just as good as the previous 3 Kung Fu Panda films, which I really like, especially the first 2. I think Kung Fu Panda 2 is a wonderful, one of the best DreamWorks sequels out there. But 4, outside of its animation, it just kind of fails across the board with me. And I've sat with this movie for quite a few months, and I didn't like it, but I was not as harsh as I probably should have been. I like the concept of this movie, that Po is no longer going to be the Dragon Warrior. Instead, he's going to move on and be the kind of like the elder, master to help train the next Dragon Warrior, which I think, oh, that's pretty cool. I was like, yeah, let's lean into that. And the other aspect of this movie that I thought was interesting was, we're going to bring back a lot of these original villains. And I'm like, I think that is awesome. Especially Ian McShane's, character from the original film. It's like, okay, let's do that. Let's bring in, Lord Shen from Kung Fu Panda 2 or J.K. Simmons' villain. I was like, yeah, let's do that. And they just inevitably, they just don't. They don't do that at all. They do bring back Ian McShane's character for kind of like a glorified cameo, ends up having his kung fu stolen from him. And I was like, okay, I guess that's interesting. But they do nothing else with the other villains. And instead, this movie just focuses on Po teaming up with another animated character voiced by Awkwafina, a fox bandit named Zhen. And that's really what it is. It's just this buddy road trip movie with the two of them having to work together to stop the latest villain, the chameleon voiced by Viola Davis. But I feel like there was an opportunity to do something much more interesting. And I would have loved it if instead of Awkwafina's character teaming up with Po in the movie, I thought it would have been so much more interesting if Tai Lung instead was the one that had to work with Po in this movie, a former villain and enemy. I was like, that would have been great. Instead of just wasting him in this film and just using him as a glorified cameo, I think that would have been great. And like them coming to terms with each other and their relationship, and Po finally accepting, like, okay, I can move on from being the Dragon Warrior. And maybe Tai Lung instead, like, oh shit, like you were worthy of this, and maybe having him become that. I think that would have been much more interesting than another buddy film where Awkwafina plays another animated character. It's just so dull, and incredibly uninspired. And the fact they didn't bring back a lot of the other cast, including the Furious Five, because they just didn't want to pay them. They didn't want to pay those actors or voice actors. And so, yeah, it just feels lackluster through and through, aside from some of the animation. There's some great animated sequences in this, but the story, the characters, yeah, it ends up being like a pretty disappointing mess of a movie. And I expected better from a franchise, for the most part, that has been great, especially when it comes to the first two films. But they made a lot of money, so we'll probably get a next one. I would hope the fifth Kung Fu Panda film ups the ante in terms of the drama and just trying to do something new. I imagine we're going to get, Awkwafina in that one too. Not looking forward to that, but we'll see. Moving on from animated movies, at least for right now, Taro. Taro is another one of my honorable mentions. This is a movie I forgot I saw. And listen, when we saw the trailer for this movie, we knew it was going to be bad. I mean, it's just, it's the latest film where we have a haunted, inanimate object that, slowly over the course of the film's running time, just kills all the characters that happen to come in contact with this tarot deck, one by one by one. This movie is so uninspired in terms of being a horror film that it unironically recreates a sequence from the deconstructive horror comedy Cabin in the Woods. You know that whole sequence in Cabin in the Woods where all the teenagers like Chris Hemsworth and stuff, they all go down the basement, they're all looking over all the haunted objects, and you have the organization that's like, all right, which one are they gonna pick? Are they gonna pick this one that's gonna summon the merman? They're gonna pick this one that's gonna summon the zombie redneck family. The first 15 minutes of Tarot, they recreate that entire scene where they go down to a basement looking for beer. Maybe there's basement beer. They go down there and it's just a menagerie of haunted, cursed objects. You have the Zoltar machine from Big. You have like Annabelle down there. You have like pick a creepy old object from the past, Chad. It's most definitely down there, and it's most definitely cursed. They just happen to pick Tarot, and chaotic hijinks ensue. Even if it's like a familiar concept, at the very least, like, make these characters interesting. They make no attempt to make any of these people interesting whatsoever. Aside from Jacob Batalon, who, you guys might not recognize the name, but he played Ned in the Spider-Man Home trilogy. He's basically playing Ned here, like exactly. And he, at the very least, is charming. No one else is any charm. You forget who any of these characters are. It's like, oh, I guess that person died. They have the sexy white guy. They have the sexy brown guy. They have the sexy Asian guy. All of them get killed throughout the events of this movie, and that's that. And honestly, what would have made it a little bit better is if Tom Holland's Spider-Man showed up to help Ned. That would have made it more fun, but sadly, Chad, I hate to do spoilers, but he does not show up. Tom Holland's Spider-Man does not show up to save the day, even though that probably would have made it a little bit better. And I have two more honorable mentions that I'd like to get into detail with. Another animated movie, chat, the Garfield movie. Now, I had pretty low expectations for this film. Even though I liked the first trailer, it looked pretty cute and wholesome. Little kitten Garfield meeting John for the first time. I was like, oh, that was actually interesting sequences. I was like, okay, my interest is piqued. But then all the other trailers that came afterwards, it just looked like drivel. It just looked like crap. It just looked like, it's the type of animated film that I'm so used to, like, Illumination making, where let's just take either a recognizable, property, and let's modernize it for modern audiences, which inherently will make it feel dated within a year, if not by its release date, where it's Garfield, voiced by Chris Pratt, who is woefully miscast in the movie, dealing with a variety of daddy issues and trying to perform a heist with his dad because his dad is in league with this evil, villainous character. But in between all these sequences that don't feel very Garfield-like to begin with, it's just, let's just throw in this modern reference. Let's go ahead and do a joke about Netflix. Let's go ahead and do a joke about various dating services like Bumble. Not even jokes, just mentioning them within a conversation, even though it's not relevant to anything that's happening. It's like, what's going on? It's the worst kind of animated film, the theatrical animated film, in that it just takes a recognizable property, does not adhere to any of the things that made that property so special and well liked. And it's just filled to the brim with product placement, or at the very least references to various products. And I really dislike that. It's the worst kind of animated film. And for a while, it was on my worst of list. And the last one that I want to mention is The Watchers, which is a movie that even though I saw it not too long ago, I had forgotten that I had seen it. And this is coming from the daughter of M. Night Shyamalan, one of the daughters of M. Night Shyamalan, Ashana Night Shyamalan. And this is an adaptation of a book, fantasy horror novel, where you follow a character played by Dakota Fanning, who is an American immigrant that works in Ireland. Car breaks down, typical, outside of a haunted forest. She's run to the forest. She comes upon a bunker of a whole bunch of other people in there that say, like, hey, you can't leave the bunker because of the Watchers, these things that constantly watch us. It's actually the first third is an interesting premise. I will admit. The idea that, okay, I love a single location, a horror film, nice little bottle film, and like there's these mysterious creatures, these entities that you don't know a lot about, you don't really see them, at first, and, they kind of slowly acclimate you and tell you about the lore and acclimate you to the world. I'm like, okay, this is interesting, this is cool, but the problem is that the movie in the first third establishes all these different rules. This is what you need to do, this is what you can't do, right? Which, typical for like a horror film or like any movie that wants to adhere to some semblance of logic. But then the next 2/3 of the movie, they break every single rule that they established. Then you just kind of throw your hands up and then you go, what was the even point of that first third if you're just going to proceed to break all these rules anyway? And even though there's some imaginative camera work maybe in the first 2/3, the more you learn about the creatures, the more that's notably revealed along the way. And this is the worst thing that can happen, the less interesting they become, the less scary they become. And because they're not scary, then you don't feel for those characters that are trying to deal with them. And they don't even do a good job of really expanding on those people. You don't really get to know them outside of maybe to good fan. Like literally the best character in the film is a parrot, is a talking parrot. That thing has more charm than any of the big actors in this, from Dakota Fanning to Georgina Campbell to anyone else that shows up at any point in the film. And yeah, it's one of several frustrating horror films that came out this year. But that's my honorable mentions, Chad. Those are my honorable mentions, like 6 or 7 or so films. But now we got to go ahead and we got to move on to my top 10 worst movies of 2024. And at number 10, I have another horror film, Chad. And that movie is Imaginary. I was a fool. I was a fool to think that this movie might be good because I actually liked the trailers for this film. It looked interesting. It's like, oh, you got a new family moving into a home. You got a teddy bear that might either is haunted or is from a parallel dimension, is this evil imaginary friend that's preying upon the children and the family itself. I think that's a kind of a cool concept, right? The problem is, I hadn't realized, at least for a time, that the film is directed by Jeff Wadlow, who has done, a number of awful Blumhouse movies like Fantasy Island and Truth or Dare. But I thought maybe this will be the one. Maybe this will be the one where he finally hits his stride and he'll get it right. No. Like many of the other horror films I just brought up, this film, even though maybe perhaps on paper is an interesting concept, maybe it's something that's familiar that we've heard of before, but it's like, this could be interesting, like an evil imaginary friend that a family has to deal with. It's like, oh, you can get invested in that. The thing is, the movie doesn't make any attempt to really explain the logic of this world, how anything really, is meant to operate. But the thing that's probably the most frustrating about this movie is just how terrible these characters are written. How terrible they're written and directed, and how just bad these actors are. And, again, you could be the most talented actor in the world, as I always like to say, but if you're getting a shit script and shit direction, probably give a shit performance. But there's just so many times within this movie that characters they act out of character. One, of course, you have the annoying kids who are just obnoxious for the sake of being obnoxious to create faux conflict. I already hate that. That's always really, really annoying. But this movie just has so many just awkward scenes where, is this meant to kind of be played off like comedically or awkward, and it's just like, no, it's just how they're being directed within the scenes themselves. And so that makes it impossible for you to feel invested in them, because they're either just too weird or too annoying and aggravating. And by the time you get to the end, or, but even though the last 15 minutes is kind of a little interesting, where we finally go into this kind of mystical, horrifying, imaginary world, it's too little, too late, and you don't even give a shit what happens to all these people anyway. It's another awful movie by Jeff Wadlow, and another bad Blumhouse movie, which again, that production company is so inconsistent. But this isn't Megan. This isn't a Megan from last year. But moving on from imaginary, Chad, at number 9, oh God. This might have been even higher on my worst of list, but for right now, I'll keep it at number 9. At number 9, my 9th worst movie of 2024, I have Roadhouse. Now, for those that don't know, I'm a big fan of the original Roadhouse from 1989, starring Patrick Swayze. I love that movie. Is it a great movie? No. In a way, the movie's so bad it wraps around to being good again. But it's a goofy film. It embraces that, it doesn't pretend to be overly serious or anything. It embraces its goofiness and its wild, over the top characters, and it features just some great personalities from Patrick Swayze to Sam Elliott to Ben Gazzara, so many other supporting and tertiary characters, in the movie. Amazing lines, right? And I know that there's been attempts to make a Roadhouse remake for quite some time, and I was like, why? Like, why even bother? It's perfect as just this one single film. But Doug Liman said, I'm going to go ahead and do it, and I'm going to make it serious, which is a huge mistake. Like, I don't know why you would do that. So already, not off to a good start. But instead of, being focused on the underworld of bouncing, instead it's, it has Dalton being like an ex-UFC guy. So much of this movie just feels like an arm of UFC, because I know they put a lot of money behind it, honestly. And that I didn't like, but it doesn't just have the same personality or sense of fun that the first one does. It doesn't even have that even the thing that people were praising it for initially, which confused me. This is one of the South by Southwest movies that came out that everyone's saying this is the greatest action film of the year. I would highly disagree. But one of the things that the movie that was it was consistently praised for was for its action. I think the action in this is awful. I think it's terrible. The movie literally starts with Post Malone getting into brawls in this kind of underground UFC championship. But there's so many sequences, including with Post Malone, and Jake Gyllenhaal plays Dalton, and Conor McGregor, who I'm not particularly fond of certainly not as an actor and not as a person. But there's so much CGI in this movie where it just doesn't need to be, that makes all the fights feel really inauthentic and floaty. There's so many times where it's obvious their fists, it doesn't look like they even made contact with each other. And that just immediately takes me out. So already you have this movie that's dull, that's incredibly self-serious. And the thing that it's selling itself on, the action scenes and the fight scenes and the choreography, that ends up being one of the most disappointing aspects, because it's not really shot all that well. It's not I couldn't even tell if it's choreographed well because of the way in which the movie is being shot. And you're just kind of left with of course, there's so many uninspired remakes of 80s and 70s movies, but this is just yet another uninspired remake of a movie I have a great love for. One of my favorite bad movies. And instead of being a bad movie that is so good or so fun, it's just a bad film at the end of the day. And I really, really did. And they're making another one. They make another one despite me hating this movie so much. But yeah, number 9, I have Roadhouse. Number 8, Chad, I have The Strangers Chapter 1, another Rennie Harlan project. And this is a remake a remake, reboot, reimagination of the Strangers that came out, I want to say, in the mid or late 2000s. And that movie originally did pretty well commercially and critically. I was never really a big fan of it. I didn't really care for it. And they made a sequel, I want to say, like 10 or so years later that I have not yet seen. But I know people didn't really like that. But I guess the powers that be thought like, there's some money in this franchise, so let's go ahead and reboot it. Let's start with Chapter 1 and also do Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 the same year, which are both of these movies are set to come out. And I didn't really care for the trailers. They didn't look all that interesting to me. Nothing that we haven't seen before. Like I love home invasion movies or just assaulting like a single location, people to defend themselves. I think that's a fun concept. You can play a lot with that in terms of the characters and their dynamics of each other. And just whatever the threat is that's, coming in from the outside. Like, I love that. But this is just a lesser version of the first film. It doesn't recreate any of the original sequences in a more imaginative way. The characters in the movie just make consistently dumb decisions across the board that put themselves in danger, even though they could easily be avoided. Again, they're just creating faux conflict for the sake of creating conflict. And it has a cliffhanger ending that doesn't entice me for the inevitable sequel that's supposed to come out later this year. It's just such a disappointing, forgettable horror remake of a horror movie I don't really have that much affection for anyway. I'll inevitably see the sequels and review them, but I don't know what... I mean, at this point, at the very least, they won't just be attempting to recreate aspects of the original film. Like, now they're going to have to do something different, maybe. So, possibly 2 and 3 could be a little bit better, but if you were a fan of the first one, I do not suggest seeing this one because it's just a thoroughly pale imitation to the original Strangers. Yeah, but we'll see. I'll check out Chapter 2 and Chapter 3. Moving on, Chad, let's get back to some animated stuff. At number 7, I have a movie that probably a lot of you guys did not even see. But I saw it, Chad. At number 7, the 7th worst movie of 2024, I have Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. Now, I'm not the biggest Megamind fan. A lot of people apparently loved that first movie. And I don't even hate it. I thought it was okay. Will Ferrell just voices a supervillain. It's kind of like a spin on the Superman origin stories from an alien world, crashes down, raised by prisoners, and he chooses to become, raised by criminals, chooses to become a supervillain, right? And inevitably, after he seemingly kills his enemy, his rival, a superhero, he has to then become the hero of the city, right, of the planet. And this is a direct sequel to that original film. It takes place, I don't know, days afterwards. And I mean, I'm not against like a sequel for that movie. It's like, sure, if there's an audience for it, like, yeah, cool. If you're inspired, like, let's go. This reminded me of the various 90s and early 2000s Disney VOD sequels, like, Lion King Part 2 and Pocahontas, The New World and stuff like that. But unlike something like The Lion King Part 2, Simba's Pride, or Lion King 1.5, which is actually good, it's actually kind of inspired and fun. This movie is not that. This is not The Lion King Part 2, Simba's Pride of the Megamind franchise. One, it just doesn't have any of the original voice actors coming back, so already it's like, well, that's a bit of a red flag. But it is cheap. The animation is absolutely horrid. It almost seems as if the animators were struggling to just have the characters move around in a scene and make it feel natural. Like, that's how bad this is. If you enjoyed the action sequences in the original Megamind, which I think there's probably quite a few that are entertaining to watch, don't expect that here at all. I mean, you'll have characters that feel like a JPEG that's just moving across the screen or something. You'll notice just, textures, popping or clipping into each other within this movie. And I know that this film is, again, it's a VOD release, and it's meant to, in a way, be a pilot to an animated series for Megamind, which I guess came out. I don't really know, but could you at least put some effort into it? And apparently not. It's not funny. It's terribly written. None of the comedy works at all. The majority of the jokes fall completely flat throughout this movie. It is a wretched animated sequel that couldn't even live up to the quality of some of the better Disney VOD releases from the 90s, despite being 20 plus years in the future. So Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate, awful. And at number 6, Chet, number 6, I have another Blumhouse film. At number 6, I have Night Swim, which is actually the first movie that I saw this year in 2024. And I was hoping, yes, Chad, I was hoping that the Haunted Pool movie would be the Megan of 2024. It was not. It was not. Now, this is based on a short film from a few years ago that they say is like, oh, based on the award-winning 5-minute short film. It's not actually 5 minutes. Like altogether, I think the screen time, the actual footage, not including credits or the opening intro, it's like a minute and 50 seconds. And I mean that makes sense because there's very little things you can actually do. I feel like with a haunted pool. And Night Swim proves that. Yeah, there are very little things you can do with it. I mean, you have a family moving into a house, trying to put together their lives again after their dad, played by Kurt Russell's son, Wyatt Russell, had to end his baseball career. They're trying to, restart their lives. But, their pool just happens to be haunted. And a variety of chaos and horrific hijinks ensue. It's, again, like many of the horror films that I brought up today, it's dull. It's boring. The horror sequences are either inconsistent or unintentionally funny. You have so many of the characters in the film that, again, they don't really get much to do, or they're just there. Like, yes, of course, you have the kid characters. You have the annoying teenage daughter who's just there to be a brat and to create faux conflict because, well, we need to do something in this, in the 90 minutes that we have, less than 90 minutes that we have. And despite being like 90 minutes or less than that, it feels so long anyway. And that is incredibly frustrating. There's just not a moment in this movie that's interesting or filled with tension. It does everything that you've seen before. A lot of it all just happens to take place around a pool. And spoiler chat, the pool is not actually haunted. It's the water itself that's haunted. It's this giant, never-ending, underground lake, or reservoir that's just pumping all this water into the pool that's causing all these things to happen. But yeah, and you would think like, well, they're probably able to escape the evil of the pool to begin with. It's like, don't you worry, they'll come up with some bullshit excuses to keep the family there for the entire time to possibly set up a sequel. And I don't think this is getting a sequel anytime soon. It is definitely one of the worst horror films that I've seen this year. And I have seen a lot of bad horror movies this year. And I've, obviously brought up several of them. But, chat, that is just my bottom 5 of the worst movies of 2024. At number 5, chat, my 5th worst movie of 2024, I have The American Society of Magical Negroes. Now, I know a lot of people were excited. It's like, oh, cool. This is kind of going to be like Harry Potter. It's going to be Harry Potter, except it's just going to feature black Americans. That's not what this is. That's not what this is. Despite the description, despite the film focusing on this man played by Justice Smith who joins this secret organization, this clandestine organization of magical black people who have committed their lives to enhancing the lives of white individuals because, they don't want the white man to kill everybody. I guess it's pretty much what they say. And despite setting itself up as this satire, as this critique of tropes involving black people in fiction or in film and in television, instead of like, oh, let's dissect some of these things in interesting ways, but also make it a fun fantasy film. It barely indulges in any of the fantasy aspects. That kind of becomes an afterthought as we get later into the movie. What it actually becomes, chat, is a crappy romantic comedy where you actually have our main character who, again, is freaked out about this entire situation, but he instead ends up lusting after someone, inevitably indulging in the tropes that the movie itself is trying to critique. And that is just like, because of that, it's like, what was even the point of all this movie? What are you even trying to say? It fails at that basic level of having anything earnest or honest to say, because it gets distracted halfway through. And even in the first half, where they kind of indulge in all the magical stuff, that's not even all that interesting, and it's done away with. And you just have, again, a lot of annoying characters, a lot of scenes that feel so on the nose, that aren't subtle whatsoever, and you have a lot of attempts at humor that just fall flat. I mean, there's nothing worse than an unfunny comedy, I think you could argue. And this movie just has so many scenes where the humor, it just feels awkward. It feels cringy. It's uncomfortable, and not in like an interesting way. It's just a total failure, probably on a conceptual level. And it's one of the worst movies, I would say, in 2024. Yeah, Deadpool, you're right. It's kind of like a failed Key and Peele sketch. It's like if they did it like Jordan Peele or Keegan-Michael Key, then this could be probably interesting and fun. But as a skit, as a one-off gag, not as a 90-plus minute movie. But that's nearly what they make, and they completely fail along the way, tripping over themselves, whether it be their uninteresting concepts or socio-political critiques or just humor or just the plot in general. It's an awful, awful movie. But chat, it's not worse than this movie. At number 4, my 4th worst movie of 2024, I have Argyle, starring Agent Argyle. Not really. So listen, for the longest time, I've complained about Matthew Vaughn as a filmmaker, really for the last 10 or so years, because I think he's been stuck in a rut. He is, there's no doubt he loves the spy genre, the subgenre. You know, he grew up on James Bond films, and that's seen across many of his works. Whether it be things like Layer Cake or even X-Men First Class, or obviously The Kingsman, which has been his obsession for the last decade. And this is just him doing Kingsman again, except much, much worse. That's what, ever since Kingsman, which came out in 2014, he's just continued to do these movies, and they're just getting more and more awful. Kingsman 2, The Golden Circle already wasn't good. The third one, the prequel, wasn't good. And Argyle, again, for anyone that thinks like, oh, it's a spy movie, but it's not, it has nothing to do with Kingsman. It's in the Kingsman universe, okay? It's in the Kingsman universe. It just happens to be the worst attempt. And I just want to stop doing it. Do something different. Create a different type of movie. Indulge in a different genre. It's so weird that you just have a filmmaker. You feel like if you know, they're really passionate about a genre, and they keep making all these movies, and then they'll like get better over time. He just keeps getting worse. He's become, I think, like a lot of filmmakers, whether it be a George Lucas or a Steven Spielberg or Ridley Scott. You know, the older they get, the more set in their ways they get, and they've forgotten the aesthetics that they, you know, indulged in and created, and they've just gotten lazier over time. Like this movie, even though like so many of Matthew Vaughn's films have had great action, the action in this, I think for the most part, is terrible. There's an overuse of CGI and green screen that makes everything look fake and floaty. There are laughable scenes that just don't make any sense. And even if they don't make any sense, at least make them like visually interesting and simulating. But no, you have an entire sequence where you have Bryce Dallas Howard, who's the main lead of the movie, not Henry Cavill, we'll get to that in a second, who's literally ice skating across oil, even though that's not possible at all. It doesn't make any sense. And then you have the Henry Cavill of all, even though so much of the film's marketing was focused on him, he's barely in the movie. He has, I don't know, maybe between 5 to 10 minutes. I'm being generous of 10 minutes of screen time. It's not really about him at all. He's a character within the story created by Bryce Dallas Howard's character, who's this author basically, who finds herself wrapped up in this spy conspiracy plot involving Sam Rockwell. There's also just a lot of Sam Rockwell's probably the one character, the one actor in this movie who's doing a good job. He's always pretty consistently good. Even the movie itself isn't great. And I like his chemistry with Bryce Dallas Howard, but like everyone else is wasted. This is a huge cast of people. You have Bryan Cranston, you have Catherine O'Hara, of course, Henry Cavill, as I mentioned, Ariana DeBose, you have John Cena, Samuel L. Jackson, all completely wasted throughout this entire movie. And, yeah, to me, it represents everything that is wrong with Matthew Vaughn as a filmmaker. And I really just wish he would either just stop for a while and reassess or just do something completely different, another genre. But his next movie is going to be another spy action film, and he's just going to keep doing these over and over again. I just wish he would stop doing these because it's at its worst right now with Argyle. And I would hate to see anything worse than Argyle. But I have, Chet, because I have 3 more movies that I want to bring up. And at number 3, and this probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone, at number 3, I have Sony Pictures' Madame Web, as I've been calling it these last few months. I mean, listen, the Sony Spider-Man-less Spider-Verse has been an absolute mess. It's like, yes, the Venom movies have been certainly commercially successful. There's no denying that. I still think those movies are very bad. Morbius was terrible. So many of these films have felt like artifacts of a bygone era. That era that was the 90s and like early to mid 2000s superhero films, right? When people in these studios and filmmakers were trying to figure out, what do we need to do? What's working, what's not working, right? And there were many mistakes along the way, of course. There's some good films in that era, most certainly, of course. But a lot of, like films like Blade, the first Blade, the initial X-Men films, at least the first 2, Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, right? So, of course, there's a number of good ones. There's a lot of crap, too. And there's a lot of stuff about those movies that have not aged very well, that feel dated. For whatever reason, Sony and the powers that be, the Tom Rothmans of the world, the Amy Pascals of the world, there's like, we just want to create movies that feel like they're from that era, and it is not working. And when it was announced that they were going to do a Madame Web movie, I'm like, why? Why Madame Web? Even as a kid, I didn't like the character. Even as a kid, I was always confused by them. Like, I remember when I first saw them pop up in Spider-Man, the 90s Spider-Man animated series. Just like, I don't like this character, this clairvoyant telepath who also has connections to like all these other people across different dimensions. I'm like, all right, it doesn't really fit very well for Spider-Man, in my opinion. And when we first saw the trailer, I mean, we were all mocking it. We were laughing at it. My mother was studying spiders in the Amazon right before she died. It's like everything that we were seeing visually looked terrible. Bad CGI, very odd cinematography, and the dialogue. The dialogue was just awful. And people were clowning on it for months, and the movie finally came out, and it was even worse than the actual trailer. I'm just saying something, because at least the trailers you can laugh at. It was only like 2 minutes of footage, but you got to sit through 90 goddamn minutes of bullshit of a Spider-Man-less Spider-Man movie with Dakota Johnson as Madame Web, which again, doesn't even make sense because Madame Web is typically portrayed as being a very older woman. But in here, she's young. And I'm sorry, Dakota Johnson, like, listen, there's plenty of actors that I've said, like, hey, you could be the most talented actor in the world, shit script, shit direction, shit performance. She's just not a good actor. It's gotten to that point now where even films that have been recommended to me, that people say that she's really good, like in Bad Times at the El Royale, I'm just like, she's like the weakest thing about that movie, And in here, I mean, and obviously, she's made her opinions known on this film, and while marketing it was like bad mouthing and everything, but you can just tell watching it, she does not give a shit whatsoever. So much of her delivery is uninspired, incredibly flat. I mean, that's across the board for, of course, all the other actors that show up in this movie. God, who else? Isabella Merced, who's in the film, playing another Spider-Person. Sydney Sweeney playing a Spider-Person. Celeste O'Connor. Like, anything that they do with these women is uninspired or boring or, thankfully, sometimes a little unintentionally funny. Also, it features just one of the worst super villains that I've ever seen in a superhero movie. I'm unfamiliar with the actor, Tahar Rahim, I believe his name is. I forget even what the name of his fucking character was. Ezekiel? I think it was Ezekiel. Very different from the comics, chat. Again, his whole thing, he says, I just want to maintain power and I'll kill anyone that I have to do so. There's just so many moments in the movie where it's obvious that he's been dubbed over, that there's ADR. Like, you'll literally watch him speak and, like, what's coming out of his mouth is not matching his lips. And that is funny, but it just goes to show, it's like, wow, they really were just messing up throughout this entire production. It's a movie that didn't need to exist. It's a movie that hurts the superhero genre and hurts the Spider-Man brand, and it perfectly showcases how inept Sony is when it comes to making live-action Spider-Man films. People are always going to give them credit for the animated movies. I don't think they deserve that credit. I think that was a fluke. They had no idea what the fuck they had because they let that team do what they wanted to do. But whatever. But in regards to these live-action Spider-Man films, they've just been so terrible. And I am not excited for Venom 3, despite the symbiote horse everyone's losing their minds over. And I'm certainly not excited for vegan, animal-loving Kraven, especially after watching Madam Web, which is one of the worst movies so far this year, and one of the worst superhero movies of the 2020s so far, and certainly of 2024. But, chat, there are two movies that I think are actually worse. At number 2, that doesn't come as a surprise, I think, to anyone who knows me. At number 2, the second worst movie of 2024, I have Zack Snyder's Rebel Moon Part 2, heavy emphasis on that, The Scar Giver, whatever the hell it's called. His director's cuts, they're going to have new subtitles now, and so it's going to get very, very confusing. Listen. As you guys know, I am not the biggest Zack Snyder fan out there. Okay. Now, not to say that I don't like some of his movies. I do. I think his first film, Dawn of the Dead, is a great remake. It's a great remake. Little wonk in the last third, but overall, really good, very entertaining movie. I like 300. 300 is very fun. And I think Owls of Ga'Hoole is perhaps his most underrated film ever. That's his animated movie. I haven't seen it in a few years, but I remember going like, this is actually really interesting. It's dark. It's creepy. It's a fun movie. Outside of that, I'm not a big fan of his filmography. Especially his recent filmography, his DC films, Army of the Dead, which was one of his first big post-DC projects. But these Rebel Moon movies, the Zack Snyder's Star Wars, which it's been, marketed as, I'm still kind of just shocked by how bad these movies are. Copying Star Wars, all these other science fiction, fantasy franchises that we've all consumed that many people have consumed for decades. Whether it be, like B-movie fare, like, Battle Beyond the Stars, or like huge epic fantasy films of the 21st century, like Lord of the Rings, like so much of those movies' DNA is here. So many of those types of characters and sequences and plot points are here. It's just all handled incredibly poorly. Like, there is such a lack of competence in this movie that it's in both films, but certainly in Part 2, that's staggering. Like, Rebel Moon was my worst movie of last year for all the reasons that I just brought up right now. Just, a meandering story, lack of characterization, poorly paced, an abuse of slow motion that actually takes away from the action scenes themselves, unintentionally funny dialogue or action sequences. I mean, it's just a blatant failure across the board. But I honestly thought, and I talked about this in my original review for Part 2, I said, you know what? I don't think, before watching Part 2, but certainly at the start of my review, I said, I don't think this is going to be as bad as Part 1. I think because, even though that movie was literally just going from planet to planet, recruiting a person, not at all engaging them in conversation, and just repeat that, 5 or 6 times, how many people they recruited, I can't remember. It's like, okay, well, they got that all the way. So at least for the second film, Now that the team is together, which they have to fight against the Empire because the Empire wants wheat or whatever, well, they're going to have to talk to each other now. They're going to have to talk to each other, engage in conversations. We're going to get to know them as people. It's like, well, that's inevitably what's going to happen. And to my surprise, Zack Snyder doesn't have them talk to each other whatsoever in the film, aside from maybe 2 scenes. One where after 30 minutes of farming, for 30 minutes of slow motion farming wheat, which I'm like, I never want to see a farming sequence ever again in film. Certainly not one by Zack Snyder. But you literally have a scene. It's just like baby shit. It's like what a middle schooler thinks how to build character depth, where you have each character sit at a table, and you have Jimon Hunsu again, and you have some talented actors in here. They're all wasted across the board. But you have Jimon Hunsu that then goes, all right, everyone, let's go around the table and talk about ourselves because I don't think we know about each other very well. And they just proceed to do that one by one by one by one. And it's the same story. It's like, I came from this planet. I'm fucking sad. The Empire fucked me over. The end. That's what it is. And it's like, what are you doing? And then there's one scene where Sofia Boutella's character has sex with the guy. I don't know his name is Schmuckles. I don't know what his name is. Jeff Farmer Schmuckles. And she reveals like, I came from this planet and I did this bad thing and the Empire fucked me over and I'm sad. And that's it. And then the next, I don't know, hour and 25 minutes is just an action scene involving all of the warriors that we've collected over time and the villagers who, again, apparently, we were told never knew how to fight, and yet after a single training montage, which they were already really good in, they all know how to fight. And these action sequences, I don't think they're very good at all. I don't think they're shot very well. I don't think they're choreographed very well. Again, Zack Snyder constantly indulges in slow motion to the point where it's comical and you can't help but laugh, and that removes any sense of tension to begin with. It's a wretched copy of better science fiction films and fantasy movies that we've seen for decades. And it's Zack Snyder completely indulging in his bullshit. It's obvious that he has not listened or read any of these criticisms, and as a matter of fact, seems to be ignoring it and seems to just doubling down, tripling down, and on all the things that certainly I and I think others dislike about him as a filmmaker, and it's making these movies just wretched. And we have the director's cuts coming out in a month. I'm very interested to see what those are going to shape up to be. We'll find out. But despite Rebel Moon being as bad as it is, Rebel Moon Part 2, have you ever seen that chat, The Scargiver? It's not the worst movie this year that I've seen. I had to think about this for a while because it was between Rebel Moon and this movie, but I thought, honestly, maybe I can at least make fun of Rebel Moon Part 2. Like, I can mock that film. Like, I did an audio-video commentary for it. That in itself, even though it was hard to watch, it was fun to make fun of the movie. This one, you can't. You can't, Chad, because the worst type of film to watch, and I also would say review, is a comedy. A bad comedy. And this is the worst comedy I've seen this year, and probably one of the worst comedies I've seen in several years. But my worst movie of 2024, at least so far, is Jerry Seinfeld's Unfrosted. And Jerry Seinfeld making his directorial debut. I hope this is his last his last directorial effort as well. I mean, this is Jerry Seinfeld attempting to bring back the parody movie. That kind of like that Mel Brooks-esque film. Like History of the World Part 1 or Spaceballs or High Anxiety, stuff like that. Or even, this is not a Mel Brooks film, but it's another one of those parody movies. Airplane. It's Jerry Seinfeld attempting to do those types of movies and completely failing. He has a huge ensemble cast of recognizable actors, comedians, celebrities, Seinfeld himself, Melissa McCarthy, Hugh Grant, Jim Gaffigan, Amy Schumer. Pick a name out of a hat. They're probably in this movie. And him completely misusing every single one of them. This is a fictitious adaptation of the true story about the creation of the Pop-Tart, which I think could be interesting. And people go like, how can that be interesting? And it's like, well, how could a movie about Facebook be interesting? And look, we got The Social Network. So I think it is possible. Like, I wouldn't actually mind seeing that. But Jerry Seinfeld's not interested in indulging in the history or showing how that came to be, how this, this breakfast product kind of, changed the face of American breakfast tables, and breakfast tables across the world, right? It's just him doing sketch comedy. It's just it's one scene after the other of these just really bad sketches where it's Jerry Seinfeld's comedic sensibilities on full display, him making references to stuff from decades ago, like from the fucking 60s and 70s, that people of my generation, hell, people older than me, and certainly people younger, were like, what are you even talking about? It doesn't make any sense. It's just so much of that with these sequences that like really have no sense of connectivity, like whatsoever. And it's just so painfully unfunny. It's the kind of movie where I had to pause. I had to watch this over the course of several days. I was like, okay, I can only do an hour today. I'll finish it up. And I was like, I couldn't even do that. I was like, all right, let me take a break after that 20 minutes and we'll finish it up the next day. And that's what this movie is. It's a failure of a comedy, of a man who thinks he's the funniest person in the room, but in actuality, he's the least funniest person in the room. It's a man that I think is Jerry Seinfeld, that is, who has kind of revealed himself to be a person who has not moved past 1998, who has not moved past the Seinfeld finale, and hasn't looked around maybe at what other comedians or what other comedic filmmakers or writers have made. And he's just indulging in all the things that aren't really that funny. And it also, I think, reveals that the true talent behind Seinfeld, I think a lot of people understand this and know this, is it's Larry David. Despite Seinfeld going on about how there's no funny comedy movies being made, there's no funny TV shows, even though there's been plenty of amazing comedic TV content produced for years. I mean, look at Always Sunny in Philadelphia, which is the longest running live action comedy series of all time. I think kind of the spiritual successor to Seinfeld. Horrible people doing nothing. That's what it is. I mean, Larry David has been making Curb Your Enthusiasm, just wrapped up. Jerry Seinfeld's been on that show. And it's just saying like insane, nonsensical things. And at the same time, trying to show people like, well, this is how you make a comedy, this is how you make a parody movie, and just like, no, this is the antithesis of a comedy, one that is thoroughly and painfully unfunny throughout, that doesn't even try to do anything that's unique or fresh or fun. It's just a movie made by a very self-indulgent man who, again, has not moved into the 21st century, who still literally feels like literally in 1998. And that's why Unfrosted is the worst movie that I have seen so far this year. But that could change. We're only at the halfway point. There are another 6 months of movies that I'm going to be watching, that I'm going to be reviewing, that I'm going to be breaking down for you guys, and I imagine my list will be expanded by the time we get to the end of the year. But what about you guys? What are some of the worst movies of 2024 that you've seen? Both your top 10 or honorable mentions. Very, very curious to know.
5 minutes later.
Let me see what you guys are saying. He was the least. Yeah, that's the thing. That's the thing about Jerry's Fun. You're right, bro. He's the least funny character on his show. Oh, Lord. And I think I had some people come in here before. Ace Rock, good to see you. Welcome, Ace Rock. Clown Freaks, welcome. Cozy Big Man, welcome. Glee, thank you for the 100 base. Happy 4th of July to you. Appreciate that. I'm sorry if I missed anyone's comments or donations during this part. Mr. Dabalina. That's a good name. VC Axie, thank you for the follow. Appreciate that. Good to have you guys here. Let's see here. Cozy Big Man, I've yet to watch Legend of the Guardians. Owl's Ghoul is good. I recommend it. I like watching it. I thought his ending worked better than the comic ending. I'll give him that. Mm-hmm. I thought the ending with Dr. Manhattan, that worked. I agree. Roll Moon is what you get if you made Star Wars the way all toxic bigoted incels demand in the YouTube comments and Rotten Tomatoes fan reviews. Oh, if we fight, we need exposition for a scene. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's right. Real McCoy, hard hands. Good to see you, Real McCoy. Hope you're doing very well. The two writers not Snatch Snyder wrote the last John Wick. I'm not familiar with that. Let's see here. Amy Schumer's in it, so there's that. I bet Venom 3 and Craven will be on your list the end of the year. We'll see. I'll give them a shot. If they're good, they're good. I'll let you guys know. The ones I've seen on the list, I agree with. I've been blessed to have missed some of those. Good. Lisa, Night Swim did suck. It was pretty bad. Ignoring me, I'm sorry. It was bad. The first movie I saw this year, too. There's a few on there that'll definitely make my list, and others that might not. Cozy Big Man, ever since he was Barry B. Benson in B-Movie, terrible. Oh, my God. Yeah, we did a watch party for that not too long ago for Cursed Animation Night. And that movie, I think the only reason why that movie is popular or perceived as popular is because of the meme culture around it and the GIFs and stuff. That's the only reason. Because the movie itself is just really fucking boring. It's just dull. Look at boss, I got here a bit later in the list. And Imaginary was number 10. To reiterate for people that don't know, that just came in right now. Starting with honorable mentions. These weren't on my list, but I didn't like them. Damsel, Civil War, Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, Kung Fu Panda 4, Taro, the Garfield movie, and The Watchers. And starting with top 10 with 10, increasing in badness. At number 10, I have Imaginary. At number 9, I have Roadhouse 2024. At number 8, I have The Strangers Chapter 1. At number 7, I have Megamind versus the Doom Syndicate. At number 6, I have Night Swim. At number 5, I have the American Society of Magical Negroes. At number 4, I have Argyle. At 3, I have Madame Web. At number 2, I have Rebel Moon Part 2, heavy emphasis on that, The Scargiver. And number 1, I have Unfrosted. It was coming down to, like, again, Unfrosted and Rebel Moon. But the thing is, I was like, you know what? At the very least, I would have, and I did. I had fun mocking the movie while watching it. That was fun for me. But with Unfrosted, it's just, I didn't do audio commentary for it, and so I just watched it by itself. But it was just so painful. So it has to be number 1. It has to be. Asterix Civil War made me angry. It just frustrated me. It just really frustrated me. There's a lot of people that like that movie. That's going to be on a lot of people's, I think, best of and worst of lists. It's going to be interesting. It's a very divisive film. Hamilton, I've only seen 5 movies so far this year in theaters. Here's how I rank the worst to best. Gotcha. 47 Days of Jesus. I didn't know about that movie. Kung Fu Panda 4. The Fall Guy. Oh, yeah, The Fall Guy. I wouldn't put that on like a worst of best of list. To me, that movie that was just thoroughly mediocre. Just a mediocre film. Game of Planet of the Apes and Inside Out 2. Yeah, I like both of those movies. Lee, I feel like Chris likes these worst of lists even more than the best of so much. They're very fun to roast. Believe me. No, I enjoy doing the bad movie reviews. It's because, especially when you watch something really bad and like, ooh, I can make this joke, I can do that, like I can dissect it there. Like, no, they're fun. They're absolutely fun to do. Yeah. Cozy Big Man, I loved it as a kid when I saw it in theaters back in New Jersey, but yeah, watching the movie now, I start realizing it's boring. Oh, B movie? Yeah. Agreed. Bat Boy, I'm not the biggest fan of Megamind myself. Same. I don't hate it. I was just like, But there's a lot of fans of it. It had interesting ideas about a supervillain who defeats the hero, then realizes how empty life is without his nemesis. Then it's just a romantic comedy about him disguising himself so he can date the Lois Lane's character, who's kidnapped multiple times the best. Yeah, it's true. Kind of fucked up, because then there are a couple at the end. It's kind of a messed up. That's a dark relationship. Oh, man. But yeah, that's my worst stuff for 2024. So tomorrow, which is Friday, I'll be doing my best TV shows of 2024 so far. I've been able to see a lot of good TV this year, a lot of great fucking TV. And then probably on, maybe I could maybe I could do worst of as well. I might be able to do worst of as well because thankfully I haven't seen like a lot of bad TV now that I really think about it, because I've already put together my best of TV so far this year, but I've yet to do my worst of. But the more I think about it, it's like I don't really have too many bad TV shows, because the thing is, chat, TV, it's so much more of an investment. And so if something's just kind of bad or really disappointing, you just kind of move on, right? And so there's like maybe only really one thing I can think of. Maybe there's something else too. I'll have to go back and see. But so maybe I can do both. I can do my best of and worst of. Maybe just make that one video or something. So there's that to look forward to. X-Men 97 is definitely on my best of list. I can promise that. What is on the good TV shows? You're going to have to wait for tomorrow. But you do know X-Men 97 is on there. There's some stuff I just haven't been able to see yet, like The Bear season 3. I've heard mixed things about that, though. But I've been able to watch a lot of other stuff, and so I put together a pretty thorough list. Obviously there's stuff that has just come out, especially just like these huge drops of where the whole series is available. I haven't been able to watch all those, but yeah, that'll be fun. So I can do my best of, worst of TV for 2024 tomorrow, along with a review for Maxine. We'll see if maybe Maxine would be on my best of list. A little bit of retcon or something. Hamilton, 47 Days of Jesus, by the way, is a Christian film, I figured, where some guy is busy with his job, and somehow the death of Jesus is supposed to make him realize he should spend more time with his family. As boring as it sounds. Sounds about right. Acolyte has to be number one. Cozy Big Man. Oh, yeah, the Megamind sequel. I saw the thumbnail of the trailer. I got super excited to see it at first, but after watching the trailer right off the bat, I was salted. As a fan of the original film and stuff, I was like, oh no, what have you done to him? Yeah, it's cheap. The animation's terrible. It's not even like, oh, well, maybe possibly like one of those good Disney VOD movies from the 90s. It ain't no Simba's Pride. Ain't anything like that. It's not the Lion King 1.5. Not at all. Krabby Tex and Snarf, Benarf, and all the Gagarfs. Good to have you here, Krabby. How you doing? Again, in case I missed anyone from before, welcome. Happy 4th of July to all you guys. Good to see you. We were just doing my worst of list. I did a JoJo's. Hot! Yeah, I understand that. I did my review for JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. Episode 8, that is. Super fun. But I do hope you guys have been enjoying these best of and worst of lists. They will eventually be posted to YouTube. Probably best of will be posted tomorrow. I just got all this backlog of videos I've had to edit and upload to the YouTube. But I appreciate all the support, as always. Great to have you guys here. Watch The Bachelorette and Torture. I don't want to. I hate reality TV. I can't do it. I can't do reality TV. It's too hard. Too hard. Cozy, great list, by the way. Did you add Garfield on your list? Yes. Garfield was in one of my honorable mentions. It was, it was in my honorable mentions, along with several other ones. There'll be many more honorable mentions, and I'm sure my list will change as we get, later into the year, no doubt. The next time I'll do best of, worst of movies will probably be in the first week of January of next year in 2025. So you have that to look forward to. But I'll be sure to post. I didn't see Atlas. I haven't seen that film. Again, some of these ones that I might have missed early in the year, I could eventually do reviews for them. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard for some of the streaming releases, especially just because there's just so many, and Netflix just fucking drops so much content. It's hard to keep up with all of it, But I could potentially see at some point this year. It's just busy, especially when you're in the summer movie season, where there's just typically like a new big movie every week. It's kind of difficult, but I'll try my best. But I heard that's pretty bad. Luke Boss, the last movie I've seen is the most recent Beverly Hills Cop, and it's actually pretty good. But there's one character in it that I know you would get on your nerves. They kind of got on my oh, damn. Are they like a kid character? Winvox, I'm glad Manager made the worst because the movie's... Oh, yeah, it is. It's bad. It's bad. It fails across the board. Other than maybe like the last 15 minutes where it's like, this is interesting. It's too late because you already don't give a shit about the characters. They're already like really weird and awkward, not in a fun way, just in kind of like a cringe way. So, yeah, it's a really frustrating horror film. A lot of, again, this is a bit of a. Thankfully, there's been a lot of great horror movies this year. If you watch my best of list from yesterday, I had several horror films that I'm a huge fan of. Late Night at the Devil's great. First Omen was great. Out of Darkness, I've encouraged people to check out. But yeah, there's a few bad horror films this year. Tarot, Imaginary, Night Swim. All those. Yeah, pretty damn bad. But yeah, it's at number 10. So it might fall out of that list. We'll see. And again, I could switch these around by the end of the year. Just kind of how I was feeling over the last couple days. You should have a graphic showing your list now, and your list in January 2025. Ooh, you can see how much. That's a good idea, Deadpool. I like that. Yeah. Do a comparison. Yeah, nice. I'll make a note of that actually because I think that's a really good idea. Thanks. Thank you, Deadpool. Yeah. There's someone's offspring, yes. I knew it. Jeff Allen's movies blows wads. They really do. Yeah. I'm most familiar with Truth or Dare, awful horror film. He also did Fantasy Island. He's done some other really bad movies too. He did this one film of Kevin James, which was awful. Because you make me mad. None of these movies you put on your list I saw in theaters. Good. And I will maintain that record. But since I have a review channel on YouTube, I said, "Oh, congratulations, man! There, let me shoot me over a link. I'll check it out. I'll watch the movies and review them." Yeah, no, do that. No, feel free to include a link. People can check it out, and I will check it out myself. I'm waiting on Deadpool and Wolverine before getting back to the theater. Yeah, me too. I'm very excited for that. I'm very excited for Deadpool. Let's see what's coming out, chat. What we can look forward to for the rest of the year. Thankfully, there's a lot of movies I'm very much anticipating. Tomorrow I'm going to be seeing Maxine, which I can't wait. Very, very excited for Maxine. Really looking forward to that. Let me go ahead and bring up movies 2024. We actually made good time because now we're going to... Yeah, thanks, man. Nice. Martin Vavra? Is that how you say his name? Martin Vavra. Well, there you go. You just got a new subscriber, good sir. Yeah. I'll be sure to check out your videos and your reviews when I have the time. Yes. Just checking some things out here. Cool. But let's look at movies 2024. Am I going to see Despicable Me 4? I don't know. I'm just... Yeah, well, you guys know I don't like Despicable Me. I feel like my review is going to be bad, negative, no matter what. Who knows? It could be the one. It could be the one that finally they nail it. It's the 4th film in the Despicable Me franchise, but isn't it the 6th overall if you count the first 2 Minion movies too? Let's see. What do we have coming out for the month of July? Maxine, as I said, which I'm really looking forward to. Yeah, can't wait for Maxine. Let's see here. Tyler Perry's got a new movie? Tyler Perry's Divorce in the Black? Oh, my God. I didn't know about this with Megan Good. Ooh, all right, Chad. I did not know about this film. It comes out on the 11th. It's next week. Long Legs. Really looking forward to Long Legs. That's out next week. And then you have Twisters. Twisters, which is on the 19th. I'll see Twisters. I'll review Twisters. Of course, Deadpool and Wolverine at the end of the month. I'll check that out. Then August 2nd, I should say, you have Harold and the Purple Crayon, which looks like a disaster. M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, I'll definitely check that out. Borderlands, oh, man. Oh, that Cuckoo movie. I'm looking forward to that movie. Alien Romulus, which I'll see. Looking forward to that. The Crow. Part 2 of that Horizon movie by Kevin Costner. And then September, we got Beetlejuice. I'm actually looking forward to. The more I see about that, the more I see of the movie, the more I'm like, I'm intrigued. You got that one. Got that remake, Speak No Evil of James McAvoy, which looks interesting. The Transformers 1 movie. Megalopolis. And a number of films. So, yeah. Interesting things I'm looking forward to, chat. Whether they be good or bad. At the very least, it'll make for a fun review.